Hello, I'm Dr. Michala Hulme and welcome back to Unearth the Past, a family history and genealogy podcast that delves into the lives of interesting people. On today's episode, I'm excited to welcome Lee Aspden, a visionary in the world of fashion and a true cultural pioneer. He even has a road named after him. Best known as the mastermind behind Adidas Spezial, Lee has redefined contemporary sportswear. His collections have become a firm favourite among cultural icons such as the Gallagher brothers, Jurgen Klopp, Pet Shop Boys, Goldie, the Sex Pistols, Stephen Graham, Idris Elba. I could go on and on and on. Hailing from Darwen in the northwest of England, Lee's journey is one of deep connections to community, identity and storytelling. So it's my pleasure to introduce the king of cool, Lee Aspden. Welcome to the podcast. Lee, thank you so much, mate, for coming on my podcast.
Thank you.
I really appreciate this because I know you don't do many podcasts.
I get asked to do a few, but I don't do that many, no.
So when I messaged you and said, do you fancy looking into your family history? And I know you'd already sort of looked into it a bit yourself, hadn't you? What was it that you thought, yeah, I quite fancy doing that?
A few years ago, I realised that my parents were getting older and I started to ask them questions about my family and I found out some pretty interesting stuff from them. And my dad passed away in 2020 and my mum's... she's in a care home in Blackburn, but her memory's starting to go now. And
right.
You realise that once, my family are working class people, once they're gone, that they take all that information, all those stories with them. So me and my girlfriend Joanne went on Ancestry.com, but she had a lot more patience for it than I did. And
she's a very good, isn't she, Joanne? You've told me about her tree. She's gone quite far back, hasn't she?
Yeah, she had a good dig around with it, and I had a bit of information, but I kind of kept hitting blanks with it really, and then kind of forgot about it. And then out of the blue, I got a message from you saying, "Would I be interested in doing that?" And I thought, actually, I would, yeah.
Yeah.
So, because apparently you're good at finding these things out.
Finding people. But before we delve into it, let me ask you a couple of questions then, just about you, Lee. So you are phenomenally successful at what you do. You are wearing your own brand today, which I absolutely love, the Adidas Spezial. I love that jacket. You saw your collab with CP Company. How did it start for you? So I know Blackburn, but half of our audience is American, right?
Right, okay.
So do you want to describe what Blackburn is like? What was it like growing up in Blackburn to our American?
Well, I grew up in a town called Darwen, which neighbours Blackburn. It's 4 miles outside of Blackburn. And Blackburn in the 19th century was the epicentre of the textile industry in the world, basically. And so it was a very working class area, but then by the same token, in the 19th century, the real estate in Blackburn was the most expensive in country, because you had these kind of cotton barons who ran the mills there, and it's just got, that part of Lancashire has just got such a rich history. There was the cotton famine, where the working class people refused to work with cotton that had come from the slave trade.
Yeah.
Hence why you have Lincoln Square in Manchester with the statue of Abraham Lincoln, because Abraham Lincoln wrote to the mill workers of Lancashire who went hungry to stand by their principles.
And they literally did. They were literally starving, but they did what they thought was right.
Yeah, they were stoic about it. They were like, this is what we believe, and we're not going to change that. And so, I'm quite proud of my roots. I know a little bit about my roots in Darwen. I know, my granddad really struggled in the 1930s during the recession in the 30s, and he got a job as a bin man. And once he got that job as a bin man, he was like, I'm going to do everything I can to keep hold of this job. And he was... So growing up, like my dad was an only child.
Yeah.
And my granddad's house was where I spent a lot of my childhood, was almost like it had been frozen in time in a way. You know, they had an outside toilet.
Yeah.
They had a bucket in the corner of the room that people would urinate into. Yeah. And there's a kind of gas fire with 2 rocking chairs, a black and white television. But, you know, those kind of old habits of, you know, coming from poverty kind of were still there. So, you know, we always had broken biscuits from the market. We always had fruit that had just gone slightly out of date. You know, and it was, and a lot of the things the toys that we had at my granddad's house, like the drafts board, I don't know if you call that a toy, but, you know, the drafts board and the cards had come out of people's bins in Whitehall in Darwen, because the wealthy people who lived up in Whitehall would throw stuff out, and the bin men back then would find all kinds of stuff in there. So I kind of, you know, I saw the real kind of tail end of that, and I know that my dad grew up in, you know, real poverty, I guess, you know. And my mum's side of the family are from Blackburn, and my dad's side are from Darwen, but I was born and raised in Darwen.
Is there a slight rivalry between Blackburn and Darwen? And I don't know this, but I know...
Yes, there is. Yeah. But they fall under the same council, but they have different MPs. But when I was growing up in Darwen, it had its own law courts, it had its own kind of its own newspaper, you know, like it was quite independent of Blackburn, and then the two got kind of put together. But Darwiners are very much like, you know, we're Darwen, we're not Blackburn. And so there was, they're quite, they're only 4 miles apart, but they're quite different. But growing up, it was, you know, it's a working class area, really. And there was a handful of factory employers. The ambition for a lot of people as kids would be to get a job working at either ICI or Crown Paints, or because, you know, if you got a job there, you'd get shift work, and working there, you would you'd be able to afford a family holiday and a terraced house. But it's very kind of, you know, Darwen's, you know, there's a lot of terraced houses there, but there's also a really beautiful countryside that surrounds it. And, you know, I have a real fondness for the place, and that fondness has grown as I've got older, really. I think that when I talk about Blackburn and Darwen in the 19th century, it was also the birthplace of professional football.
It was.
Or for your American listeners, soccer. But it was, so it was a bit, you know, the first ever professional football player played for Darwen FC, a Scottish player called Souter, and he ended up becoming the landlord of the Millstone pub where I used to drink. But he left Darwen FC to go and play for Blackburn Rovers. All those northern mill towns are at the very foundation of the Football League.
Would you say your upbringing and Darwen and Blackburn has inspired some of your collections?
100%. Yeah. 100%. Yeah. I you know, the thing about growing up was it was very much, it's a story I've told many times. I had a mate, Paul Ryder, it was called, and Paul Ryder said to me, "Oh, I'm going up to Bogart's," which is a local disco on a Thursday night. And I was really excited about the fact he'd said, "Come up to Bogart's," because that was where the cool kids went. And I had a brother who was 4 years older than me. My dad was always working overtime. My mum worked 3 jobs. She worked on the market. She worked at fruit machine wholesalers, and she also worked in a pub. And so growing up, I didn't see a lot of my mum and dad. So my brother became like my surrogate dad in a way. So I just used to follow him and his mates around everywhere. And I was always the scrawny kid on the end, where when they were picking the football teams, they'd be like, you know, because I was a lot younger and a lot smaller than them. "Oh, you have him." You know, I was always the last one to get picked because I was young. So I always hung around with like my brother and his mates who were older. But it was kind of, it was pretty rough and ready growing up. You know, it felt like the two things you were measured on were how good you were at football and how good you were at fighting, really.
Yeah.
And you know, I didn't really think about fashion or any of that. But one night I go round to Paul Ryder's house to go to Bogarts. I knock on the door. He comes to the door and he looks me up and down and said, "No, you can't come out with me looking like that." I said, "What do you mean?" He went, "Them jeans are fleurs. You know, we don't wear jeans like that. We wear tight jeans." I had no idea what he was talking about. So he said, "Go home, get your mum to take your jeans in, come Bogarts with us." Go home, said to my mum, "Can you take my jeans in?" She was like, "What are you talking about? I haven't even got a sewing machine. Don't be so ridiculous." So I ended up sat in watching Top of the Pops instead of going to Bogarts. But that was the first time I can really remember becoming aware of what fashion was. But after that, I thought, there's no way I'm getting knocked back off anybody again. So sort of I took an interest in clothes. And growing up, there was like, you know, when I first got into clothes, it was Adidas trainers, tight jeans, Adidas rain jackets, Adidas t-shirts, Fred Perry t-shirts, Slazenger sweaters, and then onto Pringle jumpers and Leyland Scott and Lacoste.
All the cool stuff.
And then Fila and Tashini and then into all the designer stuff, Armani and Boss and all that stuff, you know. So I kind of grew up through that. So it was kind of, you know, it's like the ethics of mod in a way. It's like, you know, clean living under difficult conditions. It was all about how you presented yourself and what you looked like, and you were always kind of moving with whatever, you know, look was, you know, whether it was hairstyles or trainers or jeans or, you know, so it went from tight jeans to semi-flares to bell bottoms to baggy jeans to tapered jeans to 501s. You know, it was just constantly changing and evolving. So I think that upbringing in many ways informs what I do for a living now. You know, I did go and get a formal education as a mature student. I studied in Preston, but I think those experiences growing up, being in the right places at the right times, gave me a kind of an instinct for it.
Well, I'm going to start by delving into your family tree now, if that's all right.
Please do.
So I have got a copy here of your family tree, which you can refer to at any point. I've actually gone quite a bit further back than this, right? But this is just the sort of bread and butter bits. So feel free to grab that and hold it whenever you want. Now, normally when I do this, I start on your paternal side, your dad's side, but I thought just to shake it up a bit today, we'd start on your mum's side. If that's all right with you.
It's cool.
So, your mum is Lillian Hargreaves.
Yes.
Her mum was Elizabeth Whittaker, which is your grandmother.
Yeah.
And she was born in 1910 in Blackburn.
Yeah.
I have found a record for your grandmother just before the war, and that's in 1939, and she appears on the 1939 register. Would you like to have a look?
Yeah, I'd love to.
She's just there. So this is a register. It's like a census record. It's taken just before the war in 1939.
So, James Hargreaves, Elizabeth Hargreaves, Jean Hargreaves, Marion Hargreaves, Lillian Aspden. So it goes on to their names after they've been... Yeah. Okay.
And if you look on the top left, it should tell you what road they lived on.
Top left.
Right at the top of the page.
Oh, right at the top of the page. Brewery Street.
Brewery Street.
Yeah.
So, by 1939 then, your grandmother was married to your grandfather.
But she was with someone prior to that.
Yes, I'm going to get to that. So she was married to your grandfather, James Hargreaves. They married in 1937 at the local registry office.
Right.
But this was not her first marriage, as you rightly pointed out. In 1930, 20-year-old Elizabeth married William Andrews.
Yes.
At St. Luke and St. Philip's Church in Blackburn. In 1931, they welcomed a daughter. But sadly, 3 years later, William passes away. I've got his death certificate if you'd like to see it.
I'd love to see it. because this was the thing I found out about. My mum has two sisters.
Right, okay.
But her older sister is they're both her older sisters. Her oldest sister is her half sister.
Yes,
so
that's
she's
correct.
William Andrews'
So that's
daughter.
Marion. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you can make any of it out.
20th of December 1934, 21 K Street. He died. William Andrews, 25 years old. Second man on
I think that's a motor lorry.
motor lorry for General Davis.
Yeah.
Exhaustion, tubercular abscess of hip. Elizabeth Andrews, so that's my grandmother, widow of deceased, present at the death in 21 K Street, Blackburn. That's interesting, because I know a little bit about this.
Yeah.
Because I found this out when I started to question my mother about my background. Because my Auntie Marion and my Auntie Jean I thought were just my mum's sisters.
Right,
I didn't know that Auntie Marion was a half-sister.
Right, okay.
So I didn't know anything about William Andrews until a few years back.
Yeah.
But what happened to William Andrews was he got injured at work.
Right.
And because I don't think the National Health Service was around at that point.
No.
So he couldn't get the health care and he ended up passing away.
Yeah.
So my grandmother was left with the baby, but that's when my grandmother started to attend a local spiritualist church.
Right.
So apparently a lot of working class people in the early 20th century got involved with the spiritualist church because, for one, there was no health care, and for two, there were wars, and it was always the working class people that were sent off as cannon fodder. So there were a lot of people that were grief-stricken at that time, and the spiritualist church offered kind of some solace to them, I guess. So the story goes that my grandmother went there, and a medium told my grandmother that she was going to meet the love of her life and he was going to be sat underneath a portrait. And I found out that she had a brother who passed away. I think it's called, might have been Edwards.
Right, yeah.
He died in his early 40s, I believe. This is what you might know better than I do. But she, one night, her brother comes home with his mate, Jimmy. Jimmy plonks himself down in the chair and there's a portrait of, I think it's my great-grandfather on the wall above him. And apparently it was love at first sight for those two, and they were together until Jimmy passed away.
Yeah, yeah.
So they're, it's...
What a story.
But what happened was the medium then told my grandmother that the lawyer she was using, because he was trying to get some compensation for losing her husband from the owners of this mail lawyer, wherever it was that he worked, was that the lawyer she was using was in league with them. With them. Yeah. And so she became she was completely sold on spiritualist church.
I'm going to stick with Elizabeth, if that's all right. So we're going to go further back. So Elizabeth is the daughter of Samuel Whittaker and Ellen Riley, who will be your great-grandparents. Do them names ring a bell?
Well, my mum always talks about the Rileys and the Moonies, about they're the Irish.
We're going to come to them.
Yeah. So the Moonies are on my granddad's side.
That's
the
right.
Rileys are on my grandmother's
correct.
side.
Yep. So I managed to find the family in 1921. That's just after World War I, and they're living at 6 South West Street, and that's in Blackburn. I also have your great-grandparents' marriage certificate, if you would like to see it.
So Samuel Whittaker and Ellen Riley were married on December 27th, 1909, 2 days after Christmas, at the ages of 23 and 18. And he was an iron turner, 21 Pink Street, and Ellen Riley lived on 20 Clayton Street. Clayton Street's not a million miles from Nab End.
Right, okay.
And very close to where the Spiritualist church that I'm talking to.
I love that you know these places.
Yeah, so all that kind of that area of Blackburn is like, like Montague Street is where I spent a lot of time as a child. Father's name, so it's William Whitaker and John Joseph Riley. And he was a labourer, and John Joseph Riley was a boilermaker.
Boilermaker, yeah.
That's some job, isn't it?
I know, yeah. Probably quite a dangerous job, to be fair, making boilers, I imagine. Yeah. Right, I'm gonna keep going back. So Samuel Whitaker, then, who is your great grandfather, he was born in 1886, and I have his birth certificate, which I'm going to show you now. So I don't know if you can make that out, but that is your great-grandfather's birth certificate.
26th of March 1886, 24 Garden Street, Blackburn. Samuel, and his father's William Whitaker, and the maiden name of his mother, Elizabeth Rebecca Whitaker, formerly Barnes, okay. Rank or profession of father? Butcher. That's interesting, because my mum worked on a butcher's stall for a while.
Did she?
Yeah, when I was a kid, I spent a lot of time after school, I'd have to, primary school, go down and sit on the butcher's stall. So, yeah, that's one that my mum did for a while in Darwen Market. So Elizabeth Rebecca Whitaker, mother, 24 Garden Street, 27th of April 1886, this was registered. And that's the registrar's signature.
Thank you very much. So I managed to find the family after Samuel was born on the census record. So I have them on the 1901 census, and I'm just going to show you that now. And I want you to actually look at, the census is great, it's taken every 10 years. The first census we have access to is 1841. The last census we have access to is 1921.
Okay.
So we've got them every 10 years. I want you to have a look, though, at where some of your ancestors were born.
Okay.
So, there you go.
William Whitaker, Elizabeth Rebecca Barnes, Samuel, Martha, Arthur, Harry, Lillian, Albert. So that's all the same family?
So that's all the same family. So Samuel is your great-grandfather, and then William and Elizabeth Rebecca, that's your great-great-grandparents.
So the name Lillian that my mother got probably came from here.
Yeah. I
so there was a Lillian prior to my mum Lillian.
There was.
That's interesting.
Now, if you scroll across, I know that if we cut you, literally you are Lancashire born and bred, but I want you to have a look at where Elizabeth Rebecca is from.
Yarmouth, Norfolk.
That's correct.
Oh, that's interesting.
And we're going to pick up her story now, if that's all right.
Yeah.
I purposely thought I'm going to
start here. So this is my great grandmother.
So this is your great grandmother.
Right,
yeah.
Okay.
So this is Samuel's mum. Do you remember on his birth certificate it said she was called Elizabeth Rebecca Barnes?
Right.
So this is Samuel's mum. So this is your great grandmother.
Right, okay.
Yeah. So let's unpack her side then. So she was born on the 13th of September 1860 in Great Yarmouth. Like her older sisters, Matilda and Louisa, Elizabeth went into domestic service. Sometime before 1881, she took the bold step to leave Great Yarmouth and head north to Blackburn. And it must have been a big shock going from Great Yarmouth to, the cotton industrial northwest.
Yeah.
She managed to secure employment before she got here as a domestic service with a lady called Jane Furness, and she owned a pub on Bank Top in Blackburn. And it was while she was in Blackburn that she meets your great-great-grandfather, William.
So she's working at that pub on Bank Top.
She's a domestic servant within the pub, within Jane's pub. And she obviously at some point meets William in Blackburn. I have a copy of her birth certificate if you would like to see it.
Yeah, I'd love to. So 14th of September 1860 she was born. Name and surname of father Isaac Davis. Is it?
So Isaac Barnes.
Barnes, sorry. It's the handwriting.
Yeah.
And then name and maiden Mary Barnes, formerly it's like Kieran or
That's right, Kernan.
Rank or profession of father Sergeant East Norfolk Militia Staff.
So he was a staff sergeant in the East Yorkshire. Sorry, he was a staff sergeant in the East Norfolk Militia.
So J. Barnes is the father, and then it's got militia barrack Yarmouth.
That's
so he lived in the barracks.
Yeah.
Okay.
Would you like to know a bit more about him?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Did you think that you might have a Norfolk connection when you came in?
No, not at all.
Okay, so as you can see then by the birth certificate, her mum was Mary Kernan and her father is Isaac Barnes. They are your 3 times great-grandparents, your great-great-great-grandparents. And he was a staff sergeant in the East Norfolk Militia. So Isaac then, he was born in 1816 in Westbury, Wiltshire. He started working life as a weaver. And at the age of 18, on the 9th of July, 1832, he signs up for the 17th Regiment of the Norfolk Militia. He served in the army for over 40 years. In that time, he spent at least 13 years abroad, which included 3 years in New South Wales and 10.5 years in the East Indies. He started his military career as a private, which he did for 10 years before being promoted to corporal, sergeant, and then finally colour sergeant or staff sergeant. In 1848, he married Mary Kernan in Dover, and I have a copy of their marriage certificate from 1848 if you would like to see it. I'm hoping this will inspire a new collection. A Norfolk collection.
So I remember when I was a kid, my family going on holiday to Great Yarmouth, but I don't know if I went on that holiday. I was too young to remember. I remember Great Yarmouth being mentioned in our house, but I don't think anybody realised.
I'm going to show you another record now. This is a record of Isaac Barnes, who's a staff sergeant, which you'll see on here.
So this is all the stuff that went on in the south.
So this is all
prior to her coming to the north
it.
and then connecting with a Lancastrian and all right.
You've got it. What I want you to do though, I want you to look at where Mary Kernan, obviously she's married, so she's on here as Mary Barnes, where she is born. So if you scroll across, you should be able to zoom in.
Corfu, Italy. Was that because he was in the military there? So I've got some Italian blood.
Well,
you've done the DNA test, so
we're going to go through that. Now, should we just have a quick look at your mum's dad's side?
Yeah.
Gary's mum's father was James Hargreaves, born on the 31st of December 1911. James's parents, Gary's great-grandparents, are William Hargreaves and Margaret Ann Mooney.
Right.
I have their marriage certificate if you would like to see it. This is a paper copy to date.
Oh, wow. King cotton cloth packers and cotton ring spinners. Yeah, it's all textile.
All textiles. So I managed to find the family on the 1911 census. They're living at 14 Back King Street, which is probably like a back.
Same area.
House. Is it same area? Right. Okay. Now there are 2 children on there that are not William Hargreaves, and that is because Margaret has 2 children out of wedlock before she meets William. I want to have a quick look now at Margaret's backstory. So you probably noticed that on that marriage certificate, Margaret has put that her father is John Mooney. However, I don't think that's correct.
Okay.
The reason I don't think that's correct is because I managed to get her birth certificate. And when you actually look at her birth certificate, which I know has got the right date of birth on it, there's no dad listed. What I did, I found her birth certificate. Her mum is called Bridget. There's no father listed. The address that's on the birth certificate, which you'll get by the way, is actually the address of Bridget's brother. So I think she is pregnant and she has the child at basically the brother's house. So Margaret Ann Mooney is basically born out of wedlock. We don't know who her dad is. I managed to find Margaret Ann's mum, Bridget, and she is living in Blackburn just before she gives birth to Margaret Ann with her mum, who's also called Bridget. Her mum is from Galway in Ireland, and Bridget and her brother, the house she's at when she gives birth to a daughter, are both from Liverpool. So they have obviously come in after the potato famine, settled in Liverpool, had Bridget, had Thomas, who's Bridget's brother, and then they have moved to Blackburn. After the birth of Margaret Ann, her mum, disappears. I don't know what happens to her. I don't know if she marries. I can't find a death for her, but she disappears. However, I do find Margaret Ann on the 1891 census, which I'm going to show you now, if that's all right.
Yeah.
So this is Margaret Ann Mooney, which is your great-grandmother, and this is her on the 1891 census. I don't know if you can make out where she is on that census.
Yeah, found her. Fourth from the bottom. Profession. Don't know what that says. It's got
Pauper.
pauper.
So she's in the workhouse.
Okay.
So I don't know what happens to her mum, but we know that by the time she's 8 years old, she's in the workhouse. The next census, she's working in domestic service. But on this census, she's in the workhouse. I am going to quickly move on, if that's all right.
Yeah, of course.
I'm going to now quickly fire over to your dad's side. So you should have that on your tree. If you look on the Aspden side. I researched the Aspdens right the way back. As you can see, I wasn't able to go as far back. I can only go back a few generations, and that's because you have an ancestor that was born out of wedlock, so we don't know who the dad is for that one. So I wasn't able to go any further with that. And because of how DNA works, the DNA, once you're going that far back, isn't strong enough for me to say, oh, it's him. Yeah. So I can only go so far back with that side of your family. Your grandfather was Albert Aspden.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I managed to get his birth certificate. He was born on the 22nd of February 1903 on Pine Street, which is in Darwen. The certificate shows that his mother was Betty Wewell. I'm going to pronounce that.
Okay.
Waywell. What do you reckon? Waywell. And his father was James Aspden.
So he was a miner. He was in charge of safety. Apparently he got his legs crushed in the mine, and then they gave him the job in charge of safety, and he was an absolute stickler for it.
Really?
Because he'd had a mining accident himself. But Albert is the one whose house I spent a lot of my childhood. The one that I was saying about that had the outside toilet.
Yeah.
Didn't have a bathroom. Had the rack to dry the clothes on.
Yeah.
With the 2 rocking chairs. He was the bin man. Was Albert.
It was Albert.
So yeah, and then his dad James was the miner.
Right.
He worked at a mine up in Oddleston, just over Darwen.
So coal mining and Darwen is definitely strong on that side
Right.
of your tree. I managed to find the family on the 1921 census. They are living at 38 Highfield Road in Darwen. Mentioned on that record are your great-grandparents, James and Betsy. And I have a copy of their marriage certificate, if you'd like that, from 1902. So this is James Aspden and Betsy Alice Wewell.
1902. Yeah, coal miner, and she was a weaver. And she lived up in Huddleston. Okay.
And is
Then you've
Huddleston
got-
pretty close? Because that comes
Yeah,
quite
it's
a bit.
just above Darwen. It's like a little
Right,
village
okay.
that just sits above Darwen.
Yeah.
The opposite side of Darwen, because Darwen's a valley. So the side of the valley I grew up on, it's on the opposite side of the valley.
Now, Betsy was obviously mentioned on there. Her father is William Wewell. I've managed to trace that side of your family back to your 11 times great-grandfather, George Wewell, who was born at the end of the 16th century and in the reign of Elizabeth I. And Elizabeth I is the daughter of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. They never moved. So they literally stayed within that area for
Centuries.
centuries. They never moved. Did you expect that?
Well, nowhere better than Darwen, is there?
No better than Darwen. And
They knew they couldn't go any higher, was
well, that's it. Yeah, they've literally peaked, haven't they?
They've peaked.
They've peaked. And same with the Aspdens. So I didn't manage to go as far with them, but they didn't move. They stayed within that area, or within like a sort of a 2-mile radius of that area. What I'm going to do quickly now, because I'm conscious of time, I want to just quickly have a look at your DNA results. Okay.
So they lived in Darwen from 1697.
Yeah, so I got back to the end of the 16th century. So you're talking about 1590
Right.
was how far I got back.
And this is my
And this is way
great-grandmother's
off.
line.
This is your 11 times great-grandfather, George Wewell.
'Then it was like generation on generation on generation on generation. 11 generations all lived in the same part of Darwen.
Right? So, your ethnicity breakdown then. Are you ready? You are 63% West Midlands and North West England, which is your Darwen, your Blackburn. You are 34% Ireland, so third, and you are 3% Denmark. Did you think that?
That's not a million miles. I don't know where the Denmark bit comes from.
Yeah.
But yeah. So the bit about Corfu then is probably the Irish in Corfu.
So Patrick Kernan on the marriage certificate, he's in the army. He's got he's a tanner. So I don't quite know why he's over there. Maybe it is something to do with the military. So I'm going to quickly do traits. I'm going to do 2 traits and then we're going to go. So, okay. Do you enjoy dancing?
I do, yeah.
Good. It says you are likely to enjoy dancing. That's in your DNA.
I was a breaker. I was a b-boy when I was a kid.
Were you?
Yeah, I danced all over England.
It says you are likely to drink a lot less caffeine than the average person. So that means you don't drink many cups of
I
coffee.
don't drink any caffeine.
Well, there you go. Spot on.
Haven't drunk any for over 20 years.
Gary Aspden, thank you so much for coming on my podcast.
Thank you. It's been fascinating.
I've absolutely thoroughly loved having you on. Thank you so much.
I just love the fact that my family had 5 centuries worth of Darwen in pretty much the same street. It's great. Love it.
Lovely. Thank you so much, mate. Thank you.
Cheers. Appreciate it.